Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is an astral interview with Carlos Castaneda. Before we get into it, though, let's talk about a couple things. Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel, you can certainly do so on Patreon. When you join, you get a chat function to talk with everybody, direct mail to me with questions and suggestions. You get advanced podcasts, and if you're interested, there is a link in the description. Next up, astral projection lessons. I have now had classes with extraordinary people from all over the world, and we got somewhere around now about an 87% success rate because folks email me when they have their first experience, which, I love. So if you're interested, there will be an email down in the description section. And don't forget, these podcasts come out on Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, as well as Saturday, 9 a.m. Okay, an astral interview with Carlos Castaneda. This individual had a big effect on me. Right here on my desk, I have The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge. I bought that book when I was 13 years old, and I paid $3.50 for this pocket paperback, which was not an insignificant amount of money back then for a 13-year-old. I had to work hard for that, delivering papers or all that kind of stuff. It really affected me. It kind of opened up my mind. Now, naturally, I'd been astral projecting, and that certainly gave me experiences that a lot of my fellow children didn't have, but this opened my mind to a whole non-ordinary reality. I did have some doubts about it, but I suspended my disbelief because after all, with my astral projections, I had people who doubted me, and it was kind of frustrating. So, I reserved my judgment on this, and I really enjoyed the books, and I eventually read all of his books, but this one is special. It's still in great condition, although it's yellowed because it's old, like me. Anyway, I think a lot of you probably know who Carlos is, but for those who don't know, Carlos Cesar Salvador Arana was born on Christmas in 1925, and he passed away on April 27th, 1998. Of course, he was better known as Carlos Castaneda, was an American anthropologist and a writer. Starting in 1968, Castaneda published a series of books that describe a training in shamanism that he received under the tutelage of a Yaqui man of knowledge named Don Juan Matus. While Castaneda's work was accepted as factual by many when the books were first published, the training he described is now generally considered to be fictional. The first three books, The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge, that's the one I have on my desk, A Separate Reality, and The Journey to Ixtlan, were written while he was an anthropology student at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Castaneda was awarded his bachelor's and doctoral degrees from the University of California, Los Angeles, based on the work he described in these books. At the time of his passing in 1998, his books had sold more than 8 million copies and had been published in 17 languages. So I wasn't the only one who was affected by his books. Okay, I slipped free of my body, rising into the astral plane, where everyone is a little more honest, usually, than they ever were in life. I'd been meaning to talk to Carlos Castaneda for a while. The guy who turned peyote munching and desert strolls into bestsellers and controversies. I found him lounging near what looked like an old adobe hut under a vast starlit sky. He had the same distant eyes as in the black and white book jacket photo, but now with the timeless air of someone who'd either figured it all out or had given up pretending that he did. We were in a southwestern-like desert. Just as an aside, Don Juan was supposedly his teacher, an older Yaqui man who, supposedly imparted all this knowledge to Carlos, just so you're aware. So I said to him, Carlos Castaneda in the astral flesh, you're harder to find than Don Juan's hat in a sandstorm. Carlos kind of smirked. I prefer privacy now. The astral plane's got too many tourists asking for power animals. Guilty as charged, I said. So let's get into it. The Don Juan books, are they real accounts, spiritual allegories, or high-grade fiction with a dusting of mescaline? He glanced into the desert, looking at the horizon. A spirit coyote howled. That's always the question. What is real, Rick? Is this, he gestured at the surreal starscape around us, real? Is your body lying in bed somewhere real? Or are both just interpretations? Don Juan said perception is everything. Sure, but people have wondered whether Don Juan ever existed. He frowned at my question, not quite a sigh, more like a surrender. There was a man, a teacher, not quite how I described him, not Yaqui in the textbook sense, but wise, enigmatic, and terrifying in the way truth is. The composite I wrote about became Don Juan. He was part real, part symbolic. So, composite character? Loosely inspired? Amplified for dramatic effect? Carlos simply replied, yes. Okay, but were your experiences based on some kind of reality? He laughed genuinely. I sculpted experience, but I didn't lie. I translated. You think spirit journeys are easy to explain? I know astral projections aren't to some people. Half of what happens out there, he kind of knocked on the astral air like it was wood, has no words. So I made new ones. Okay, I said, a poetic defense. But some of your followers took you literally. They tried to leap off cliffs and break their ties to the world. His face hardened at this. I never asked anyone to follow me. That was never the point. The books were maps, not instructions. The problem is people treat every map like it leads to gold, not self-annihilation. And yet, I said, you kind of were the guru, the man with the answers. Sorcery became a brand. And that was the trap, he replied. The moment people looked at me instead of through me, the whole thing collapsed. So what was the point? Enlightenment through drugs? Discipline through stalking? Power through silence? Freedom, he said. The books were about freedom from the tyranny of ordinary perception. The Nahual, which means it's a shapeshifter, or in Mesoamerican legend, or it's someone who encompasses the belief in a dual nature within the person, with a tonal, everyday self, and a Nahual, which is a deeper spiritual self. I could probably do a whole episode on just that word, but, without going on and on too much, those are pretty good definitions. A shapeshifter who can turn into an animal, and then someone who understands the dual nature of us all. Is the ocean beneath the surface real? Most people don't even know it's there. I wanted to make a ripple. But did you reach the Nahual? Or were you just paddling around in altered states, hoping for a vision? He looked me straight in the eye, no drama. Both. Sometimes I soared. Sometimes I hallucinated my own nonsense. But you tell me, Rick, isn't that the same thing out here? Well, I couldn't argue that point. Out here, on the edge of the known and the symbolic, where thought becomes form and metaphor bleeds into matter, truth gets slippery. Okay, I said, final question. If you could do it all over, would you still write the teachings of Don Juan? He thought about my question for a while. Then he said, yes, but I'd add a warning label. Reality may be altered. Don't leave your discernment at the door. Catchy. Should have made that the subtitle. With a nod and a chuckle, he began to fade, becoming a part of the desert backdrop once more. Just another mirage in the astral dust. I returned to my body with a mild headache. The books, I don't know if I'll read them again. I read them a number of times over because they were so unusual. And I think what I took away from them in the end was something that my astral projection had already been teaching me, that reality, consensus reality, is something that can be molded, and that other realities, non-ordinary realities, exist and can be reached under certain conditions, and that we need to make peace with that. And of course, to understand that our physical bodies are not us. They don't represent us. They're merely a vehicle that we drive around in while we're on the physical plane, but that should not limit us in spiritual growth. If you like that, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds, subscribe if you haven't already. And did you read the books by Carlos? If so, what did you think about them? I'd love to know. Anything you have to say or how they affected you. And of course, always ideas for new episodes, because this particular episode was given me by one of our subscribers. So let me know. At any rate, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.